The line looked harmless at a distance. Headlamps in a slow curve along the ridge, a single rope threading through black sky. But up there, every pause has a cost. Your oxygen ticks down. Your fingers go numb inside thick gloves. You shuffle forward one carabiner at a time and pretend the wind isn't asking questions you don't want to answer. This isn't a normal cue. This is a weight in the thin air where your body is already in debt. And the debt collects interest fast. Everest compresses choices. A short weather window, too many permits. One rope at the balcony, another across the narrow spine above the south summit. Dozens of teams read the same forecast and move at once. It doesn't feel reckless in the tent. It feels efficient. But the mountain has only so many places where people can pass. A few slow clips at an anchor, a stuck Jumar, a glove fumble, and the whole line tightens. Minutes turn into an hour. People who plan to stand on top at sunrise hit the ridge in late morning. Oxygen runs low. The descent starts with less in the tank than anyone wanted to admit. Donald Lynn Cash knew what it meant to want something for years and finally be close enough to touch it. He was in his 50s, the kind of age where finishing big goals matters more because you understand how many seasons you have left. He'd worked through the peaks, checked off hard climbs, and saved this one as the crown. People who met him said he was upbeat, stubborn in a good way, and relentless about finishing what he started. In 2019, the mountain was crowded and the route was clogged, but he made the summit. Imagine that moment, clouds throwing a shadow on the world below, prayer flags snapping at the marker, the sense that you've stepped into a photo you've carried in your head for years. He took it in. He turned to go. That's the rule that keeps people alive. You get up, then you get down. On the descent, just below the top, his body began to fold. The ridge is exposed there, with a drop that steals your attention even if you're calm. Guides move fast because they always do, switching oxygen, talking to him short and firm, fighting to coax strength from a system that had nothing left. The problem wasn't just altitude or fatigue, it was space. The rope was full of climbers, all clipped in, all moving at the pace of the slowest person ahead. There's no shoulder to pull into, no empty lane to stage a rescue. To clear a path, you need dozens of people to unclip and reclip in the right rhythm at the worst possible height. Every extra minute is colder air, thinner thoughts, less margin. They tried. They kept trying. The mountain didn't give the time back. That's the cruelty of a summit day jam. You can be surrounded by people and still be out of reach. A few days later, the peak gave another lesson that felt even meaner. Chris Kulish was 62, not a novice, not a showboat. He climbed because he loved the process and the places. He reached the top in the same crowded season and did what veterans preach. He turned around on time, kept moving, and made it back to Camp 4 on the South Col, the giant wind-carved saddle where tents sit like bright dots on the moon. He should have been safe there. You can see the glow of headlamps coming off the ridge. You hear stoves. You walk into a tent and feel the thud of your boots on the floor, and you think, I made it. But high camps aren't hospitals. They're still above 7,900 meters. Your body is taxed to the limit. Hours of tension from the ridge can hide how far into the red you've gone. He died at the Col, sudden and quiet, the way high places sometimes take people who looked fine a minute earlier. For friends and family, there's almost no comfort in that. For climbers, it's a brutal reminder that back to camp is not the same as out of danger. Kalpana Dawes knew the mountain too. She had a history with Everest, and going back made sense to her because of what the summit symbolized. She was 52, driven and by all accounts stubborn in the way people must be to keep trying after setbacks. She reached the top and started down into the same choke points that had slowed so many others. The path above the balcony is narrow, with places where you clip around a figure eight of rope and shuffle sideways into wind that sounds like a freight train. She became sick high on the route. High-altitude illness doesn't argue. It just takes. You can't crash on a couch and sleep it off. You need to drop fast, and fast is exactly what a queue can't do. Teammates helped. Guides tried to move her down. But the rope ahead was full, and the cold was absolute. When you've spent hours above 8,000 meters, even stepping around a single climber becomes a problem. People hesitate to unclip. Everyone is careful because one misstep can turn into two tragedies. The minutes that could have saved her bled away in a line that didn't care who was in trouble. 3 lives, 3 versions of the same trap. Cash collapsed near the top in a place where the rescue path was a body length wide. Kulish reached the col and still never saw base camp again, the hidden cost of effort revealing itself after the ridge. Das ran out of time, where a jam turns a manageable problem into a fatal one. None of them were reckless cartoons from a headline. They were determined adults who prepared, paid, trained, and believed. The system around them, the permits, the narrow window, the single rope, made their margin thinner than it looked on paper. It's easy to argue about numbers. Should there be fewer climbers? Should there be stricter experience rules? Should guides be forced to double rope bottlenecks so one line is for up and one for down? All of that would help, and all of it is complicated. Fewer permits mean fewer jobs for the people who live off the season. Tight experience standards sound great until they create workarounds and a gray market of operators who promise what others won't. More ropes mean more Sherpa labor at deadly heights and more exposure while setting lines. Weather doesn't care about policy. It gives a short opening and people move. The reality is messy because the mountain is an economy as much as a symbol. Decisions at sea level change how the ridge feels at sunrise. So, the burden shifts to judgment. The best outfits keep clients off the jam by launching on off-peak hours and defending turnaround times like they're sacred. They front-load oxygen, over-prepare for backups, and pressure clients to pass on summit day if the route looks like a parade. That's a hard sell when someone has saved for years. It's harder when you can literally see the top and the sky is clear. Up there, emotions sprint ahead of math. You tell yourself, you'll be fine. You tell yourself the line will move. You tell yourself you'll make up time on the way down. Even experienced people believe these things because belief is the fuel that gets you out of the tent in the first place. Cash's story drives home what happens when belief meets physics on the narrowest ground. There's no blame in that. It's a description of the setting. Guides can be skilled and caring and still be trapped by the same rope that holds their client. They can't cut the line without risking others. They can't create space that doesn't exist. They can talk and swap bottles and push, but the clock is louder than any advice. That conflict plays out in slow motion on a ridge where you can't hear your own heartbeat for the wind. Kulish reminds everyone that success doesn't always look like danger. He did the disciplined things and still paid a price that felt random, but it wasn't random. It was accumulated strain, plus age, plus exposure, plus whatever time he spent in line up high. The descent is not a reset. Your body doesn't reboot at the col. It cashes the check you wrote on the way up. That's why seasoned climbers treat the return to Camp 4 as a checkpoint, not a finish. You keep hydrating. You stay on oxygen. You watch each other carefully for symptoms that would be a footnote at sea level but are a siren here. Das's final hours show how a single delay can steal the last chance to stabilize. If you become ill above the balcony and the rope ahead is jammed, you can't simply step aside and wait for strength to return. Waiting is exactly what your system can't do. You need speed. The line gives you a crawl. Teams behind you might want to help, and often do. But once a queue forms, good intentions compete with limited space and limited oxygen. That's why so many tragedies cluster near the same features. The terrain writes the script, and people are forced to read their lines. There are ways to tilt the odds. Pick operators who set hard turnarounds and keep them. Carry more oxygen than feels necessary, and spend it early if you're cold or slow. Leave when others don't, even if it means a night that starts in the dead of morning. Don't assume you'll pass quickly at the choke points. Measure your day as if the line will be worse than the photos. If you reach the south summit late, that's a warning, not a footnote. Take the hint. The top will still be there next year. Your margin might not. People like to say the mountain doesn't care. That's true, but incomplete. The mountain doesn't care, and the line doesn't either. A queue has one job: make everyone behind it live on someone else's pace. In a city, that's annoying. Up here, it's lethal. That's why Cash, Kulish, and Das matter beyond their names. They're not just stories, they're 3 clear signals from the same week that say the risk isn't always the storm or the cold or a single bad call. Often, it's the weight. So keep the image in your head simple: a rope, a ridge, a row of climbers moving slower than they want. If you ever stand there and feel your plan shrinking while the line inches forward, remember these 3. Ask if you have the time, oxygen, and strength to let someone else set your pace this high. If the honest answer is no, the bravest move isn't 10 more meters toward the top. It's turning around before the line chooses for you.